You asked for it. Renai Transportation, Factorio's foremost meme mod. If your problem with Factorio is that your items and trans just weren't airborne enough, then this is the mod for you. It's called Renai Transportation because, I don't know, weeaboos or something, but it's got thrower inserters, train ramps, and all sorts of things. This is a bit of a weird one for me, because usually I try to beat some mod or complete a clearly defined challenge, but this time I've just got to make a very silly base. Well, I'll do my best. I'm also going to be playing this one on Death World because I've become accustomed to a certain level of pain and normal Factorio just isn't enough to excite me anymore. If you start a Death World run, what you'll really want to do is find these big rocks that give you loads of stone and some free coal, which you can use to build stone furnaces and fuel your burner drills without needing to mine it first. Saving you not only time, but pollution, because pollution equals biters, and biters equals the aforementioned death. After we start mining, it's only a matter of time before a pollution cloud causes some biters to start knocking, but we've got lots of trees which absorb pollution, so it should be a while before it actually reaches the nests. The easiest way to stockpile coal in the early game is to make burner drills that feed into each other. When you're against the clock, I wouldn't recommend more than 1 or 2 copper furnaces, since you only need a little bit compared to iron, and if you're going to be creating pollution, you might as well be doing it to create things that kill biters, like ammunition. The first thing I research is gun turrets, because they're pretty much the only means of defending yourself this early on, but soon enough I get automation as well and start making some steady ammo production. Electric mining drills require power, which at this stage means coal-powered steam boilers, but despite putting out almost the exact same amount of pollution as burners when you factor in the boilers, they consume 60% less coal overall and mine twice as fast, meaning that per pollution you get almost twice as many iron plates. I'm not going to go into the details, but suffice to say, because it creates less pollution, it lowers the amount of iron that we'll need to turn into ammunition. By the way, it's possible to crank up the difficulty so high that creating ammunition spawns more biters than you could possibly kill with it. Thankfully, this is just a normal, calm, relaxing Death World run. I actually got pretty lucky with all these trees. Normally I'd be getting attacked by now, but I was able to build an entire furnace stack before I ever even saw a biter. Since one piece of coal lasts a stone furnace for about 45 seconds, one inserter dropping coal on the belt is enough to keep the entire side fueled. So we've got a good supply of iron up, and I'm going to turn most of it into ammo for now. It never hurts to be prepared. I also have enough time to set up the copper furnaces as well. With that I can fully automate gun turrets, which have a way of blowing up when the biters start appearing, and now I'm pretty much out of the woods for anything that Death World can throw at me. They might be able to destroy parts of my base at this point, but total unrecoverable loss is pretty much off the table. If you wanted to watch me get destroyed by biters instead, I recommend you watch my video where I played Death World with the Rampant mod installed. This isn't really the focus of the video, so I'll be going through this part a little fast, but as always, you can make your base as hideous as you want as long as you call it your starter base. It's okay, the goal of this video is to make a really silly base, and this is totally intentional. Automating red and green science is fairly straightforward, and pretty soon we've got all the early science at our fingertips. And it took them a while to get here, but the biters finally start showing up. Not that many though, even with the Death World settings causing them to absorb half as much pollution, the trees around here have been working pretty hard. And their reward for working so hard will be the privilege of absorbing even more of my pollution. As we ramp up our production, the boilers are starting to give off a ton of pollution, but that's why I intentionally shoved them in an area with lots of trees and as far away from any enemy bases as I could manage. The next thing I'm going to need is some steel, so here's another furnace stack. The iron from the top half gets put on the outside belts, which are filtered to only let coal through. As soon as we have steel, we can start making some red ammunition, which means we'll be safe whenever the medium biters start spawning, since they're virtually invincible to yellow ammo. Also, grenades are good. I've mostly been using pipes as walls so far. Because they only cost 1 iron for 100 health, they actually provide more protective power per pollution produced than walls. Also, you have them at the start, but once you're set up, walls are much more convenient. And here's my absolutely beautiful routing. You only ever need 1 wall assembler, but incidentally, we've actually created everything we need for military science, although we'll want some more grenade assemblers since each military assembler needs about 1. So I was wondering how I was going to route this horrendous spaghetti mess into my labs, but then I remembered, oh yeah, this video is about Renai transportation. And so I made some ejector hatches and launched the science 15 tiles away right in front of the labs. What'll they think of next? As I'm automating supplies, there's no good way to get steel into the medium pole assembler, but Renai Transportation's got me covered with these thrower inserters. All it needs is a hatch for the stuff to land in. I get some engine assemblers up in preparation for oil processing and chemical science, since I'll use them to make the car I'll need to actually find the oil, and on death roll that isn't always easy. Finally, I find some crude oil quite far from my actual base. It's also got a decently sized nest near it that we'll need to take care of first. I've got some stone bouncing in so I can automate pump jacks and refineries. And some flamethrower turrets as well, since extracting that oil is definitely going to piss off some biters. We're getting attacked pretty regularly now. And here's the research I'm most excited for: train ramps. The ramps take some concrete though, so here's the best, most intelligent way I could think to possibly automate it. So I've got my train ramp, and I decide to give it a little test. Yep, definitely airborne. Clearly, this is the best way to attack a nest. Now to take out that nest below our oil, I figured I might as well use these primer bounce pads, which if you throw a grenade on them will cause it to explode when it lands. It's not much more effective than just slapping down a dozen gun turrets, but it's pretty funny to just watch them slowly chip away at the nests. Well, we've got the oil field set up now, and completely defended with flamethrower turrets. Now we just gotta get it to our base, which I'll do with a very simple double-headed train. If you're using a train like this, you don't even need rail signals, it just goes back and forth forever. Time for oil processing. I don't know why I built this many refiners for a base I'm not intending to go past chemical science with. I think my brain has been turned off for at least the past 2 hours. As usual, the biggest priority is construction robots, so I'm setting up for advanced oil processing ahead of time. This whole base might look like a big mess, and yeah it is, but since I know my ratios and about how much production I can eke out of a single input belt of iron, it's more than capable of producing a continuous stream of chemical science. Chemical science is probably the biggest milestone in the game since it unlocks all the important tech like construction robots and electric furnaces. Once you've got it, you can start building for the end game even without the other sciences, because everything from then on is mostly just upgrades to existing buildings. And then I see this tech: payload wagons. Naturally, I build one immediately. That nest is a good guinea pig, and if the description is to be believed, I can launch a train and automatically detonate up to 100 grenades at once. Unfortunately, nests are pretty resilient against explosives, but I foresee great things with this technology. Given the size of these Death World nests, I'm definitely going to need some help if I want to expand. And want to expand we do, but first we'll need construction bots, which I assemble in the most intelligent way possible. People keep complaining I'm too negative, so from here on it's only positivity for this fine base. Also, our iron patch is starting to run dry, and I still need this place to make supplies, so I set up a very efficient double-headed train with one wagon to help keep it on life support. The biters are becoming more than just a couple gun turrets can handle, and with the nigh-impenetrable big biters on the way as soon as we reach 50% evolution, it's about time I walled everything in and defended it with flamethrowers. Unless you're belching out mega-base levels of pollution, a wall of flamethrowers is all you need for defense, as long as you've got robots repairing it. But the easiest way to defend against attacks is to make sure they don't happen at all, so I'll be making tons of efficiency modules. Mining drills are the biggest source of pollution, and with just 3 efficiency modules each, you can reduce their pollution by 80%, as well as their power consumption. And now I can finally get to the whole point of this run, crashing trains and launching them into the air. By using 3 stations, I've created a blueprint that automatically spins and launches at the same velocity every time, so now I can aim precision train strikes wherever I want. It's very convenient for clearing out all the space I'll need for my real base. And you know how lame it is to sit around and wait for inserters to slowly empty a cargo wagon? Haven't you ever wished you could just do it all instantaneously? Well, Renai Transportation's got you covered with this impact unloader. You just need to handle the cleanup yourself. So this spray pattern is a bit ridiculous and hard to imagine using in a serious design, but after some testing I realized that I could constrain it a bit if I use buildings that have no space between them, like solar panels. And this is why I don't use the squeak-through mod, for this one time that I'm vindicated by the solar panels having such a massive collision box that it becomes the backbone of my entire base. The way these things work is that when a train collides with the impact unloader, it'll automatically skip the station it was heading towards and head for the next. That means only double-headed train designs are possible. One of the major challenges is that to actually unload everything, you need to be going fast, but not so fast that the spray is ridiculous and unpredictable. The easiest way I've found is to make sure that the train is going max speed before approaching the unloader, which results in these hilarious spirals, then making the station close enough that the train will slow down a bit before impacting so you get roughly the same spray every time. Also, it's really important that the trains not get slowed down for any reason, and because of that I've given each resource its own separate lane. However, there are places where the lanes need to intersect, but trains will always cede right-of-way to the faster trains, so I'm reasonably confident that the trains coming out after bonking won't get in the way of the trains coming out of the spirals. Now we need to actually design the forges, and since we have a relatively narrow space to fit them, I've decided to go with one of the most tried-and-true furnace designs, in which you run the input and output belts through with undergrounds and leave the space on either side for beacons. Fully beaconed with tier 3s, you can get an entire blue belt of plates with just 13 furnaces, instead of the 72 that it would take unbeaconed, and it's extremely compact too. Just make sure you have the inserters set up correctly, or else they'll drop on only one side of the belt. So, where do the trains go after they unload? Well, back onto the main rail system, of course, and a rational individual would just run some nice, normal track and be done with it. But think of all the space and the rail we could save if we made them all airborne. Okay, I cannot adequately explain the insane amount of trial and error that this whole thing took. It's almost as if the game never intended for you to make your trains fly 300 meters and land safely. The worst offenders are these train bounce pads. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the whole thing explodes, and sometimes only the back train car explodes. It's weird, but I need them if I want to clear the whole distance. Anyway, I get it working enough to paste in-game. Since this is where all the trains are coming out, throughput is very important. There's these electromagnetic train ramps that are much less prone to exploding and will gently sit your train down on the tracks instead, but they take power to operate and can't go nearly as far as the normal ramps. Because of that, I'm using it to gently place the trains inside the spiral. And the genius of this design is that because this spiral has no signals, even if one train is already inside, any additional trains will continue through at full speed. It's the best way I could possibly think up to build up enough speed for a full-length jump in a relatively compact area while maintaining maximum throughput. Unlike these spirals before the unloading that can only have one train inside of them at once, since to get inside the spiral you need to drive over all 5 loops. So that'll clear the full distance of my furnace array, in theory, so now we just need some raw materials to smash against the unloaders. And that means we need to actually set up some mines for trains. Even though all the trains are double-headed, which would allow me to reverse out from a dead-end station, I've gone with this design, because it allows multiple trains to wait behind while staying inside the walls. Also, I've got this extra train stop, whose purpose I'll explain later. Don't forget this is Death World, so I'll want these mining outposts to be reasonably protected. After getting iron, copper, coal, and stone on trains, I can finally start testing out the smash and launch system. So here's how the train schedule looks. It's a little bit more complicated than just go to mine, then go to forge, but basically, when full, the train waits at one of these stations to act as a buffer. Then when there's a demand for that resource, the smasher station will become available, and one will head into the spiral to build up speed. After colliding with the unloader, it'll head to a station just past the magnetic ramp. Then it goes inside the exit spiral, passes the first station, then tries to head to the second before getting launched, landing, and finally heading back to the mine. So it seems to be working, and then for no reason at all, some of them randomly start flying way shorter and blowing up. I have absolutely no idea why it's doing this, and I'm just kind of sitting here helplessly while they all blow up. At least I saved the game before this. Trying to get to the bottom of it, I stepped through it with the editor, but I still have no idea why it's doing it with some of them and not others. And then my old nemesis is back. Only the rear train detonating. I've become quite familiar with these things, and I've discovered that this particular error is because when the front car disappears, the trailing cars start to slow down a bit, arriving slightly behind each proceeding car, which can make the first few reach the pad and the last ones fall short because, I don't know, rounding errors or something. This is an important aspect of using the ramps. You can't just have a rail end in a ramp, you need to have a valid station past the ramp to convince the train to actually run over it. And if you don't want it to slow down at all, the station needs to be pretty far away. I thought it would be fine if they reached max speed, then theoretically would all slow down the same amount for the station past the ramp, but apparently not. So in an attempt to make the whole thing more reliable, I've moved the second station up so the trains won't try to slow down at all. Now I just need to find a good place for the bounce pad and pray it works. It seems to be working, so it's finally time to start setting up some furnace stacks. I'm going to run the steel off of the same iron supply, which is why I intentionally gave iron ore the shortest trip from the waiting bays to the unloader. I'm compressing the 6 lanes of the unloader down on both sides, and as much as I'd prefer to balance them all together, it's a bit hard with that rail in the way. So I'm just going to assume that if I balance the output of the furnaces later, both sides will get drained mostly equally. And we've had a bit of an accident. I didn't explain it before because I needed to amend it, but the way the station handles trains is by continuously reading the belts on hold mode and sending a signal to the train stop to set the train limit from 0 to 1 when there's no iron ore past that point. But that was causing some spillage because when the train hit the unloader, the train switched stations before the ore reached the belts, so the waiting train thought it was still empty and swooped in, even though the station was blocked a few frames later. I fixed this by only allowing the limit signal through to the train stop if the rail signal for that section of track doesn't show a train inside of it. After that little hiccup, we've got fully automated smelting ready to go. All the furnaces are filled with efficiency modules, so just the energy from the solar panels that I only needed to take up space is actually enough to power this whole thing. So I think it's working, but then out of the blue, instead of exploding on the bounce pad, the train explodes on the rails this time. Whether or not it happens seems to be completely random, and so I'm doing all sorts of things out of pure desperation. Just as I'm about to resign myself to needing to design some sort of automatic train replacement system, I realize that it's because I set a train limit of 2 on the mines. And so if there were already 2 trains at that stop, the train had no valid destination and would just freeze in place until the trailing cargo wagon crashed into it and caused the whole thing to blow up. Getting real science production is going to take a while, so here's a trickle of yellow science I automated. Now the only thing we're missing is oil, and I'd really like to put it here, but that would require crossing rails with our impact unloaders, which should never be slowed down for any reason. And going around would get in the way of where I want to build my base, so the most sane and rational thing is to just jump over the unloaders. With my literal hours of trial and error designing these things, I've created this design which should launch any train the same distance every time. It stops at the station at the entrance for 1 second to ensure that it always enters the loop at the same speed. Then it alternates between the 2 spin stops until finally it builds enough speed and heads to the station at the ramp. The end result should be a predictable jump every time. And there we have it, fully automatic jumping oil trains. So one problem, you need water for oil processing, and there isn't any water nearby. However, I have the perfect solution, filling a train with water and launching it over my smelting array. It utilizes a variant of the oil launcher, which you'll notice has some extra track and a station in the middle. Because, remember, we need a sufficiently far and valid train stop after the ramp if we want to ensure that it launches at full speed. With this design, despite being relatively compact, from the train's point of view, as soon as it passes the ramp station, that central stop is over 2 full rotations away. Also, just like the impact unloaders, jumping off of a ramp skips the train stop in the scheduling. Now it's time to set up some actual oil processing. It's just your standard design with some space for beacons in the middle. It's nothing ambitious, since I've only got about 6 blue belts of copper plates as my raw input, and this base really isn't built to be expandable. Still, it never hurts to add space for beacons. As always, for a real base, you've got to set up oil cracking so you don't end up with a surplus of oil. The ratio of heavy oil to light oil cracking here is roughly correct, but cracking is incredibly simple as long as you know how to wire up a pump to a tank. That way the oil only goes into cracking when it's over a certain level. And it's time for everyone's favorite Factorio logistical solution, the main bus. Unfortunately, the thrower inserters absolutely murder your game's UPS, and as much as I'd like to feed everything with thrower inserters, I'd get lagged to death before I made it to red circuits. Since I know the general level of production I'm going for, I can make these factories a lot more compact, like these sulfur and sulfuric acid plants. I'll also need some plastic, and again I'm making space for beacons to fit on the outside while also keeping enough room to get 2 full belts out of this setup with the fancy little trick of making the belt side load halfway through to get a full belt even though inserters only drop on the far side of belts. And yes, this is still Death World. It's actually pretty peaceful when you're running off of solar power and have efficiency modules and everything, but I still need to clear out the occasional expansion party. With violence. Also, I shoved some lube next to the plastic. You only need like one plant making lube ever, but I like to make things symmetrical. Now those of you in the know might have noticed that my sulfuric acid was lacking iron plates, and all my iron is over there, which is why I'm going to just bounce all the iron all the way over here. Only slightly more convenient than belts, but much more hilarious. One weird thing is that even though these trains were waiting here, they never got fueled automatically from the requester chests I unlocked with my trickle of yellow science, because they never counted as stopped if their destination is a station with a train limit of 0, so I had to add a 1-second stop to each. These are the subtleties you'll never encounter if you just play the game normally. After that, we've got all the raw materials we'll need to beat the game, and now it's just a matter of assembling all of the intermediate parts. First step is green circuits, and this design is very ubiquitous, since each circuit assembler needs 1.5 wire assemblers to run with no downtime. However, it's difficult to add more than 2 beacons to later, so if I was going to build much of a bigger base than this, I would have gone with another design. Now, explosives aren't used in any science, but they are used in things that explode, and the ones I'm most interested in right now are cluster grenades. They're very expensive to produce, taking 7 grenades each, but I've got plans for them. After some time, I finally got a full stack of cluster grenades, so let's test them out. I'd say they're pretty effective. Next up are the red circuits, and as a general rule of thumb, unlike the green circuits, they only take 1 wire assembler for every 6 circuit assemblers. You can never have too many red circuits, because even if they're not going into science, you can always use them to make modules. Again, I'm trying to leave space for beacons on the outside, which means that I can only have 1 belt there. The privilege of building a second base like this is, since you've already researched them, you can just go ahead and get processing units out of the way while you're doing the other circuits. They take sulfuric acid, and to keep up with the theme of leaving room for beacons, I'm routing all of the acid between the assemblers and weaving the input pipe through the central belts. The best thing about engine units is I can just copy the entire red circuit build and swap the recipes. I'm going to be expanding down here soon, so time to employ more trains of mass destruction. And just like that, it's all clean down here. Here's low-density structures, another thing people never seem to build enough of, mostly because they take so long to craft. I'm going through these builds pretty fast because they don't have much to do with Renai transportation, but I should mention the cool way of using 2 splitters facing each other to create 2 split belts, and how I've been alternating which lanes I split off from the main bus so I don't need to balance it as often. Also, I should mention how useful this mod's electric zipline technology is for going back to the old crappy base to pick up supplies. And here's some advice from me to you. Even if you don't have a use for landfill yet, you're always going to wish you had some once you do. Next, I'm building this incredibly convoluted section that makes batteries, electric engines, and robot frames all on the same footprint as the other builds. It's got all sorts of things, like putting green circuits on the near side of the belt so the batteries can be dropped on the far side, putting steel on the far side so it can filter out engine units and route the electric engines back on the near side, and running lube right through the middle. The only way it could have possibly been more convoluted is if I used belt weaving. It even makes accumulators. The train started exploding again, and as it turns out, the biters ate the rails heading into the iron mine, so there wasn't a valid stop anymore, so they just exploded again. I'm also getting annoyances like this. Even though my pollution cloud is tiny, random nests keep spawning inside of it from expansion parties. So I've decided to finally bite the bullet and secure my borders. Since the only thing these walls need to block are expansion parties, a single row of flamethrowers with hand-supplied oil and some roboports is more than enough. Since it's pretty far from the base, I'm not hooking up the roboports to the main network, because giant gaps in coverage tend to get robots stuck. Just these hand-fed supplies should last until the foreseeable future. Those of you keeping track at home know that we've got everything we need to make yellow and chemical science, so now we just need to make the rest of them. I'm not going to use them for a while, but here's the rocket control units for space science. Oh yeah, also winning the game. Purple science is the only tough one left, and because I'm obsessed with keeping everything in the same footprint, this lane is going to make both the productivity modules and the furnaces and drop them on the top and bottom belts instead of the center. Also, I'm finally having some power problems, so I just pasted a bunch of solar panels. This base gives the illusion of being well supplied, but it's still running off of this one tiny iron patch. I'll worry about that once I've actually got science up. Here's the rails for purple science. This part of the run is completely normal, so sometimes I look over here and remember that this is how I'm getting all my supplies. Then this happened. No idea how, but ever the optimist, I choose to believe that it won't happen again. It did blow up all of my iron trains, though. Given the hazards, and in the interest of not needing to redo my train scheduling again, I've decided to make a copy of every train and put them all here. The rest of the science is super easy to build, with the entirety of green science done with just this, and red science only takes gears. Military science's ingredients takes a little bit more thought, but finally we've got all the raw ingredients to make all the science at once. In preparation for actual production, I set up another mine, but it's far outside the safety of our walls though, which means it'll need some actual defense. But places like this get hammered constantly, so hand-feeding repair supplies to each mining outpost would be horrible. And this is where that second stop comes in. If you've ever watched my other Factorio videos, you should recognize this simple auto-restocking circuit by now. It just reads the contents of the logistics network from the roboport and subtracts that from a set of constants that I set as my desired amount of each item in storage. That means any positive value represents a deficit from my desired amount and the actual amount at the outpost. We can feed that signal into a filter inserter and set it to set filter mode so that any item with a positive signal will be pulled off from the restocking train until there's enough to make the signal disappear. After that, it's just a few combinators to only enable the automatic restocking train stop if we're below a certain level of an important item, like pipes, walls, or repair kits. Once you build it once, you can have any number of stops restocked by a single train. I'm tired of relying on my old base for supplies, and I've had logistic spots and requester chests for ages now, so it's about time I set up a proper bot mall. And I'm going to keep saying it until everyone in the world knows it, but you can shift right-click an assembler, then shift left-click a requester chest, and it'll automatically add the ingredients for that recipe to the requests. So I've got all the stuff to make science. Now what? Well, I could assemble them all here, but there's no rocket fuel for the rocket, so obviously I'll need to move everything over to the oil zone instead. Except, aw dang, someone put a ton of solar panels in the way. I guess I'll just need to make another ramp then. Twist my arm, why don't you? Each science is going to have its own train with 2 mixed cargo wagons, filtered with the correct ratios to make as many complete science packs as we can out of one wagon. We'll use the same center drop spiral design as the ore train exit launcher, because unlike the oil and water, throughput can actually be an issue here. Something like the red science train not so much, because it can hold enough supplies to make 4,000 science in one trip. But the purple science takes 10 rails each, and the low density structures for yellow and space science only stacked at 10, so they'll be moving a lot more frequently. Obviously they need to complete a round trip though, so let's build where they land. To send them back, we'll use the exact same design, just with the entrance a little modified. Now behold, my brilliant science solution. We're just gonna hurl it all into the air. Unfortunately then it gets all jumbled together, but fortunately we've got these directional bounce pads that can only bounce certain items certain directions, so this is how we'll be filtering everything out. So I'm going to bounce them onto belts, only to put them back into a box. I need 3 lanes because it's possible for the throwers to chuck so many items that they would spill out onto the ground if it was only 1 belt wide. My plan is to take advantage of the ability to throw items to create an extremely compact science array 5 assemblers deep, since a thrower inserter can throw up to 15 tiles away. The chemical science is a bit weird because it takes so long to craft compared to the other sciences, so I need around 10 assemblers instead of 5 to keep up with the rest of the science. There's also the matter of the low-density structures, which are used in both yellow and space science, which means they're all going to be bounced off to the same place off the pads, so I need to do some weird splitter shenanigans. But that should work, now we just need to set the recipes. And add all the hatches and ejectors to all the assemblers. All the boxes will be hooked up to wires and fed into the filter inserters off of the trains, which will read the contents of the boxes and activate when that specific item is below a certain limit. It's tedious, but it works. Even more tedious is setting up the train scheduling. Ignore that the drop-off station is also called pickup. It doesn't actually matter because once it goes off that ramp, as far as the train is concerned, the other one doesn't exist, so it'll still work normally. Now to see it in action. This whole video is secretly in response to the absolute state of the United States railroad system, and an offer of my unparalleled locomotive expertise. Department of Transportation, I'm available. The best part is, this joke will always be relevant. Well, clearly there's still some kinks that need to be worked out, but I'm still available. And we have touchdown. As planned, the train pulls into the station and the throwers start throwing. And surprisingly, it actually makes science. Alright, now we just need to test out the return trip. What can I say? Engineering ain't easy. The solution is to route the escape rail farther in the spiral so the second train stop is even farther away. Again, since the train will have launched into the sky long before turning onto it, even without signals, there's no risk of trains ever colliding. Oh boy, that problem's back. I landed too far ahead of it, so maybe this'll do it. Shockingly, it didn't blow up that time. While you're being hypnotized by the spiral, I command you to subscribe. The throwers are throwing, but very slowly. Then I remember that there's something in the options that limits throwing so it doesn't overflow any belts, so I turn that off, and nothing bad could possibly happen. Now that's the kind of throughput that I'm looking for. Something bad happened. Oh man, I gotta delete all these inserters, they're going crazy. What a mess. Well, it's not like we're using this base anymore anyway. Okay, it's in my main base too. Thankfully, we can set up a deconstruction planner to only pick up things off of the ground. Now you may have noticed that there appears to be a fatal flaw in my design. The thrower is only throwing into one assembler, and as it turns out, there's no way to dynamically change throwing distance with circuits or anything. If I wanted to throw at 5 different distances, I'd need 5 different inserters. Or do I? You see, when you try to paste an entity of the same type but different settings on top of an existing entity, it actually instantaneously applies those settings to the thing beneath it. No need for bots, it just happens, and you can do this from anywhere. Unfortunately, this is useless as I need to do it manually and there's no way to automate placing a blueprint. Or is there? With the Recursive Blueprints mod, I can force these blueprint deployers to paste whatever blueprint is inside of it by sending in a signal from a circuit. So if I make 5 separate blueprints for the throwers set to 5 different distances, and hook each deployer up to a timer that cycles through each blueprint every few seconds, you get this. 5 assemblers fed from 1 inserter. This was one of my brain's finer moments. I'll need to thank it later. Then the science goes into these buffer chests, which I'll hook up to the main throwers to turn them on or off so we don't get an overflow. Now to put it all in labs, and since we're eventually going to have space science, we need 4 belts to fit everything. So here's the super secret way to sideload 4 belts into one 3x3 building. And there's the whole science array, minus the space science, seeing as we haven't even researched that yet. At this point, the game's pretty much solved assembling-wise, but there's still a lot that I need to do. I don't usually go for proper endgame builds, but seeing as this video was much less of a challenge and more of a mod showcase, I'm actually going to do some upgrading. And that starts by actually making some blue belts. I usually avoid external blueprints, but I already spent all my brain power on the train launchers and science array. The impact unloaders have a bit of spillage every now and again, so I shore up that design as well. Another thing on my to-do list is a proper concrete build, which is annoying because it takes iron ore. However, there's a patch right next to the solar array that'll just mine it all from instead. It also takes a bunch of stuff like bricks, iron sticks, and steel if you want to make refined concrete. It's easy to see why most people ignore it, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. If your base doesn't have concrete and lights, it's still just a starter base. And while I'm preparing to beautify the base, I decide what we really need is a train water feature. There's even directional train bounce pads. I don't know why it gets all tiny when it goes horizontal, though. Clearly, it needs more trains. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. More trains. We need more trains. More. I think we can do better. More trains. Woo! More trains. Ah! So after 80 trains, I think I'm satisfied. Now I'm just gonna paste a blueprint that makes a bunch of tier 3 modules. It might not look like it, but the actual output of this base is quite low, and I'm mostly making science out of hours worth of buffered resources. That's because everything is still running on efficiency modules instead of productivity modules, which I hope to resolve soon. The only problem is, our base can't handle that many beacons and productivity modules. We've got tons of solar panels, but despite being as big as the base, they're not nearly enough to support that much. Considering the glowing green rocks I'm standing on, I'm willing to bet that most of you can guess where I'm going with this. Yeah, might as well build another oil field while we're here. And I'm finally setting up the only ingredient that we're missing to make a rocket. Rocket fuel. Keeping with the design, there's space for beacons. It's the only item used in science that's not on a train, but it's going to be thrown in on the same bounce pads. Finding a place to fit uranium processing is a little tricky, but I've decided to squeeze it in here. Since space is so tight, uranium throughput is unimportant, and I still need to speed up to hit the unloader, I've gone with another circular stop design, except to build up speed for an unloader instead of a ramp. Then the train will be gently brought in and out using magnetic ramps. Very gently. This is what happens when you don't have much space to put the train stop after the ramp. Processing uranium ore is pretty straightforward, and hopefully in a couple hours I'll have enough enriched uranium to kick off some Kovarex. This is the part of the game where I get to stand around and do nothing, seeing as I'm waiting on modules, blue belts, and uranium all at once. After that, I've got enough U-235 to kick off the Kovarex process, so I built a really bad Kovarex setup. Seriously, it's barely functional, don't copy this. Wait, didn't I say that I was going to be more positive? Damn it. Now I need to wait for the Kovarex to make even more enriched uranium, so I just start putting concrete over everything. Strictly speaking, putting concrete over everything causes that chunk to stop absorbing pollution, but walking faster and looking good is worth it. So what if the bugs need to absorb another continent's worth of pollution? And if you didn't believe me that those solar panels weren't enough, I've managed to kill the entire base's power with the robots charging from placing all that concrete. This is kind of dangerous because if there's no power and a train goes off of a magnetic ramp, it's probably going to crash. But whatever, I can always make more, so I'm just gonna keep placing concrete. With everything covered in concrete, it's time to start upgrading things to blue belts. I've got these storage chests filtered to red belts right below the blue belt assemblers, and a condition to turn off the inserters coming out of the red belt assembler if there's anything in storage. It's not a perfect solution because bots are stupid and won't always store things in a filtered storage chest, but it does keep my other chests from filling up with useless red belts, and recycling them does save me some iron. It looks much better with concrete, but I still don't have beacons. It's time we finally solved the power problem. So reactors next to other reactors get a neighbor bonus of 100% per reactor, so a single reactor on its own gives off a measly 40 megawatts, but if it was surrounded by 4 other reactors, just that one alone would give off 200 megawatts, and the others 80 megawatts each. Now normally you can't build reactors more than 2 wide because you need room for inserters to add and remove fuel cells, but with Renai Transportation's thrower inserters, a 4x4 reactor is more than just a dream. But I can do better than just thrower inserters. I spent several hours just designing it, but here it is in-game. Yes, that is a train track. And yes, that is an impact unloader. What I thought would really be cool is if I could say that this base is literally powered by train collisions. Ideally, the fuel will fly through the air, and if we're lucky, maybe 10% of it will actually land in one of these trypophobia reactors, but there's nothing better than a practical demonstration. Ah, perfect. As you can see, fuel is inside all of the reactors, and the reactors are reacting. It'll crash again every 30 minutes to keep everything topped off. If you're from the EPA, you might be concerned about all those nuclear fuel cells I've left lying on the ground. Well, Recursive Blueprints saves the day once again. If I put in a deconstruction planner that whitelists items on the ground, and set up another simple timer to apply that to the whole area here every 5 minutes or so, the robots will automatically clean everything up and return it all to the train. This thing will even clean up the spent fuel cells that get shot out of the ejector hatches. This whole thing puts out about 2 gigawatts, which is less than its ideal of 2.6, mostly due to the heat dissipation across long distances of heat pipes, and that I had to fit an entire train in the damn thing. But on top of our solar panels, that's more than enough for this base. And I can finally start upgrading everything. Alright, I should probably actually beat the game at some point. I mean, if beating the game was all I cared about, I could have done it like 20 hours ago. No sense launching it without a satellite, though. And I'll just make a satellite in the mall and bring it over by robots. And we win. But like I said, that was never really the goal. But hey, we've got fully automated space science now. After shoving productivity and speed modules and everything, our science per minute is around a rather respectable 150. Seriously, if you go from 0 modules to tier 3 productivity modules and everything, you'll nearly get 4 times as much science as before. Then I deconstructed the entire old base, because, I don't know, I didn't want to look at it anymore. So I was kind of at a loss of how I should end this video, and then I had a great idea. You'll never guess what the True Nukes mod does. If you thought normal Factorio nukes just weren't powerful enough, then this is the mod for you. It's really bloated with stuff you don't need, though. It starts us off with a 20-ton nuclear warhead, but if you want bigger ones, you're going to need to do some nuclear tests in this dedicated facility. You know, to be fair, seeing as this was the smallest one, I kind of expected it to be on the same scale as the vanilla nukes. Next time I'll detonate one a little further away from my base. The good news is, now we can build an even bigger one. I drove a little further away this time. This world could do with some biter depopulation anyway. Yeah, not bad. And now we can build an even bigger one. That one was 500 tons, this one is 15 kilotons. Let's see if I'm far enough away. I'm gonna need to drive pretty far to get away from this one. Here's what it looks like if we use the editor to pause and zoom out a little bit. So my base wasn't very happy with that one. Pretty much everything has sustained some sort of damage, and you can still see the tidal wave of damage spreading out. But who cares about all that? We've unlocked the big one. That was 15 kilotons, we've got 500 kilotons. But I'll keep you in suspense and give you another look at the increasingly concerned base while I share my final thoughts. Renai transportation. It's really cool. It's a shame it murders your UPS as much as it does, but the train ramps actually aren't that bad performance-wise. They take a lot of trial and error to really get the hang of them, but now they're mostly reliable. I've had a crash here and there, but it's rare. Knowing what I know now, I wish I could have made the base even sillier, but it's hard when you don't have any experience with the mod. I've pretty much mastered the ramps by now, so what I could have done if I was building another base from the ground up would be a lot crazier. But maybe that's your job. I've shown you what you can do with them, you build it. But without further ado, nuclear annihilation sounds nice. Oh, my poor base.